And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. Well, as you know by now, we've been doing a number of interviews with guests, mostly assistant history professors, labor educators, talking about the 131st anniversary of Labor Day. We call this Labor 131. It was back in 1894 that then President Grover Cleveland signed into law legislation creating Labor Day. And I often say on the show, every day is Labor Day on America's workforce, and we appreciate you, what you do as a worker to make America strong. Joining us as our featured guest is Augustus Wood, who's a PhD, assistant professor at the Labor Education Program for the School of Labor and Employment Relations at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Professor Wood, thank you for joining us here on America's Workforce. He's also author of a book, Class Warfare in Black Atlanta. Talks about what happened from 1966 to 2015. I'm sure we'll get into that. But welcome to America's Workforce. Thanks for joining us today. And I always use this opportunity as a get acquainted session to find out how you got from point A to point B. And I understand now you're originally from Atlanta. You found your way. You escaped to the north. Is that what happened here? Go ahead, brother.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure and an honor, especially on an important historical moment like Labor Day commemoration. And yes, I did escape from Atlanta to Illinois, the heartbeat of the labor movement. And I came out of a labor household. My father was active in his union, public sector union in Atlanta. And in 1977, the mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson, fired the public sector workers who were striking the city for better pay, et cetera. And so my neighborhood was basically infused in that. So by the time I was born, I was told about you need to be always supportive of the working class, be proud to be a worker. And so I always had that in my system. And it led me to continue to do the work on the ground with unions and organizing non-union workers while also studying and trying to create models and frameworks for how to intervene in crises with the working classes. And so I did my PhD at the University of Illinois, where I also was a two-time union president of the Graduate Employees Organization and one of the coordinators of the 2018 strike of 14 days against the University of Illinois. And it also paved the way for the work I do now with organizing unions as well.
Boy, do I remember that name, Maynard Jackson. I started in radio in the early 70s, and I was doing news on what became a very legendary radio station, WMMS. And I remember reading about him. I don't have all the details. I do recall there was a battle going on with public sector workers. What happened there? I'm sure you know more than I do on that.
Yeah, essentially what had happened is that there was a moment in the 1970s where labor across the South was erupting. You had strikes, particularly in the city of Atlanta, happening on an almost weekly basis. And you had over 10,000 hours of strike labor withheld from the city. And in fact, the contracts that were being won by Black labor unions were some of the strongest at the time. And so Maynard Jackson runs on the law and order ticket to be the first Black mayor of the city. And by law and order, he meant it. He came from a background of union organizing where he was a lawyer for helping unions fight grievances on contracts. So unfortunately, Maynard used that previous knowledge to help bust the public sector unions in Atlanta. And he set forward doing that in 1977 when a showdown happened, when the sanitation, water, et cetera, workers were asking for higher pay raise to deal with the, at the time, of course, you know, the political economy, wages were low, cost of living were skyrocketing. And instead, the city of Atlanta chose to take the money that they had to build a golf course at East Lake Meadows. And they did it while the workers were in the city council protesting. They passed that legislation just as kind of a petty kind of, spite to them. And so essentially that was what the battle was about. The public sector workers knew that their standing ground in the community as well as in the city over where the direction of the city was heading was it going to be in the hands of the Black worker, or was it going to be in the hands of Black capital? That was the question. And Black capital was heading global at the time. And so the workers put up a fighting stand and they organized the community in this public sector strike of 77. But Maynard did something before Ronald Reagan did it. He fired all the workers who went on strike. Then he sent an empty job application to every fired striker, telling them to reapply for their jobs. So again, when we talk about Reagan being the first to do this in mass, he stole it from a Black mayor of a city of Black workers.
Wow.
So, and that's essentially what happened. It actually crushed the public sector union power in the city of Atlanta to this day. You still have public sector unionism, but they don't have any amount of strength that they used to have because of this. And it took away a vital resource of resistance from Black working class communities in Atlanta for the foreseeable future.
And you said that was in 77. So that was 4 years before Reagan fired the air traffic controller. So Reagan learned from Maynard Jackson. I didn't realize that. I always learn something new on this show. Okay, let's get into your book. This is a good segue here, Class Warfare in Black Atlanta, because what you've done is take a look between 1966 and 2015. Where Atlanta was being transformed, and Maynard Jackson was right in that time period. What happened back then? Talk to me about that transformation.
Sure. So again, I stated earlier that African Americans became the majority of the city by the late 1960s. In 1966, they dropped the stadium on Black Summerhill, which was the Black working class neighborhood in the city. They dropped the Fulton County Stadium that became the Brave Stadium on Summerhill neighborhood. And that was a signal to the incoming Black working class people moving into the city that they were going to have to organize social movements predominantly around labor to fight back against city encroachment on their rights and conditions. And so by 1968, all the way through 1977, you had a literal war in the city of Atlanta, and they kept covering it as the city too busy to hate and all this other foolishness because they didn't want the rest of the world to see that you had a literal labor civil war happening in the city from public and private sector workers taking over neighborhood grocery stores, trying to take control of public schools, basically trying to make sure that Black workers had decision-making power over their very lives. And unfortunately, just like we see in multiple other countries, the one thing that capital does is they take someone from the group that's protesting and they give them a position of power over those protesting. And the Black mayors and city council members and others became the directors of capital and the transformation of the city of Atlanta into this global phenomenon of internationalism that you see today. And they had to do it by beating back the Black workers, destroying their unions, going after their jobs, closing the auto plants that were in the area, going after their housing, destroying public housing, all these other things they did to basically gentrify the city away from working class people. It's now a tourist site where you can go to enjoy, but you can't live there because all of the Black workers and other workers there were pushed outside the central city into the suburban deserts where there is no public transportation. There are no union scale living wage jobs. None of that stuff exists in Douglas County, Cobb County, Fulton, Coweta, Gwinnett, all the surrounding counties of the metro region of Atlanta. And so that my book covers that entire process, because you never hear about labor when you talk about gentrification, and you never hear about the consequences of gentrification and how you're essentially putting working class people, like what's currently happening with the federal government today, you're putting them in places where they don't have access to resources to fight for better conditions living and working.
I got you on a roll, brother, here. I'm going to have to take a break. I really appreciate your summary of what happened so many years ago. Augustus Wood, he's an assistant professor, labor education program, School of Labor and Employment Relations at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. We'll continue. This is part of our series we call Labor 131, the 131st anniversary of the creation of Labor Day. Back in a few minutes, you're listening to America's Workforce. Blue Cross and Blue Shield companies formed out of a need to provide affordable health care to teachers, loggers, and miners. We are now celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Blues, developing the National Labor Office to strengthen its commitment to organized labor. Blue Cross Blue Shield's National Labor Office remains focused on America's workers, advocating for affordable and equitable health care, partnering with strategic alliances to provide industry-leading products and services, and proudly serving more than 18 million unionized workers, retirees, and their families. Working hard for America's working families, for the health of America. Learn more by following them at Blue Labor on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter. And remember, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. Let's go back to our live line and welcome back our featured guest, Augustus Wood, PhD. He's an assistant professor at the Labor Education Program at the School of Labor and Employment Relations at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. You know, before we get back into what happened in Atlanta, the class warfare, I just love the fact that there's a thing called a labor education program and a school of labor. I mean, that's really cool. I think every university should have something like this. That's got to be kind of refreshing for you. I mean, you're a student of history. You definitely know what's going on with unions and the erosion of the middle class with the attack on unions, especially what you referenced in 1977 Atlanta. But talk to me a little bit about that labor education program and how is it being accepted over there in Illinois?
Yeah, it's one of the main reasons I decided to stay after I finished my PhD, is that I have the chance to not only teach students, but I get to actually work with unions and non-union workers and go into their halls, teach them collective bargaining strategies, teach them labor history, and actually help them formulate interventions into labor crises. And so it's something that began over 78 years ago. It began right after World War II, where about 5 or 6 major universities created labor relations programs, industrial relations programs, except those were geared more towards human resources and that kind of thing, where some of us were like, well, while that's fine, we want to actually empower workers. And so labor education became kind of a subset of the industrial relations school, where they focus on the more business side, HR side. We focus on the workers and actually making sure they have resources on how to protect their voices, defend their contracts, and fight for a better future. And it's one of the strongest programs in the state of Illinois. And we work with all the major federations and internationals across both the state and the country, because we're recognized for the work we do within the union halls.
Yeah, Illinois is so far ahead of the game. You got a very progressive governor, much more progressive than the last one. I'm not going to get into that. You know that story. Plus, the voters there enshrined pretty much collective bargaining into the Constitution. There, big difference from Georgia, which is a right to work state. I want to go back to Georgia here and talk about what happened again back in the late 60s and 70s, and it's kind of interesting. We're talking about class warfare, and that's exactly what happened. So let's just refresh everybody. African Americans were moving ahead. Unions were strong. And then those in power And we're talking Maynard Jackson, African-American politician who he knew everything about unions. He kind of did the divide and conquer.
Yes.
And kind of used the union. Explain that. How did that? I mean, this was calculated. This was purely calculated. Talk to me about how this actually happened, how this was allowed to happen.
Yes.
Can you explain that part?
And that's the argument of the book, is that this was not organic. This was a calculated and deliberate, what we call intentional underdevelopment, meaning the seizure or annexation of resources for a segment of the population to live in the city. And when you want to gentrify, you don't go after housing first. You go after labor first, because you want to make sure that the workers do not have access to resources to combat when you raise the prices on their home and land property value. So dismantling labor spaces, labor unions, was the number one objective of the Maynard Jackson administration, then the Andrew Young administration. And mind you, they're doing these things with majority Black elected officials who promise to help, quote unquote, uplift their working class constituencies. But instead, they're flying to Japan, to Germany, to Nigeria, to all these foreign countries, having conferences about how to sell Atlanta. At the same time, they are consolidating Black working class neighborhoods into these silos, stripping them of resources and over policing them so that it drops the property values. And you often surveil people. You take the organizers out of the neighborhoods. You go after any labor union activists. You actually intentionally repress. You buy helicopters. You scare people from meeting. They actually create a red list that they sent across the entire city of all the labor union organizers and so-called quote unquote communists, and said that they may be killed on sight by Atlanta police. So again, you have a literal disorganizing and chaotic atmosphere to crush the power of working class social movements by capital, but it's directed by the middle class administrators of the city council and mayor. But the key component of this is the Chamber of Commerce. They are active and at the forefront in most major cities when it is gentrifying, because they go after labor rights first. So yes, you're exactly right. It was intentional, and I call it a structurally violent process, because you're removing people's capacity to actually be able to live and have access to space.
Martin Luther King from Atlanta. Labor rights and civil rights, they're intertwined, aren't they? Aren't they, Professor?
They are, but you would be another fact that you may not be aware of is that after King is killed in Memphis in 1968, his father, Martin Luther King Sr., helps bust the union in Atlanta. So in 1977, Martin Luther King Sr., he busted another strike in 1972 as well. So Martin Luther King Sr. helped bust two strikes after his son is killed during a labor strike. And the city activists made sure to highlight that when it happened. And so all that's in the book, because nobody wants to talk about that there were Black legendary activists like King Sr. and Andrew Young who were actively going after workers to push them out of the city and to lose power and give it over to business and corporations.
Professor Wood, that's why I love doing this show, because you bring so many things to light. I mean, Martin Luther King Sr., a union buster? My gosh, that's just amazing. Okay, when did this book come out, by the way? How long ago?
2 months ago.
2 months ago? How's it being received so far?
Enthusiastically. It's on back order in a lot of places, and in Atlanta, everybody's talking about it. People are texting me and calling me, and most of them are from the workers themselves saying thank you for finally writing a book about the city that's not about how rich and prosperous it is and all this other propaganda. Because most books written on Atlanta talk about the city mayors and administrators in this beautiful kind of iconic light without looking at the alienation of the worker, because that's the only way you build Atlanta to be this expensive international global city, is that you have to alienate the workers, because the workers were the ones that wanted to control the decision making of the city so that it was open to all workers. But that could not happen when they had the airport, when they had the Georgia World Congress Center, when they had the Olympics coming, when they had all these other events to where they can make profit. Workers could not have any say in that. So they were pushed out of the city, my family being one of those.
Yeah, profits first, people last. That's pretty much what's going on in America. I'm sure you're paying attention to what's going on.
Yes.
In Washington right now.
Yes.
I mean, how could you not? I mean, every day it's something new. And
that's the labor.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at Trump and federal workers. I mean, right out of the chute. Bingo. We got to get rid of. First of all, they got legislation in Congress right now that there should not be any union in the federal sector. There should not be anything. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, and hopefully not. But how do you feel about what's going on right now? And more importantly, I guess, how do we fight back? I mean, there's been protests, there's been nationwide protests. It's still not enough. Yeah. And every day it seems like Trump is accumulating more and more power. The courts are letting him do what he wants to do. How do you feel about the future here, Professor?
Well, the most important thing to recognize is that the reason we're in this situation, we have to understand how we got here, is that we never took seriously the problems that came out of the Civil War, that there was no reckoning for the Confederacy legitimately for what they did. And they were given reparations, they were given their land back. So there's always been a culture of excusing the dehumanizing of people. So when you look at the federal workers not having union contracts anymore, what they're trying to do, essentially, the future is saying that unionized labor doesn't matter. And that's essentially what the purpose of the tariffs are, is to de-unionize manufacturing, whether it be here or to take the U.S. Steel name overseas and do it. There's so many ways in which they're going after to kill unionized labor altogether, because they recognize what we teach is that the union can be the primary institution to deal with all social problems. And the billionaires know it, and they know that it's on its deathbed, but we're not done fighting yet. So I am unfortunately a bit sad about how this has happened, but it still is empowering to know that there are workers on the ground now protesting on a daily basis against what Trump is doing. And that's the only way we're going to stop a bully, is we have to be ready to fight. People laugh at what happened in Texas the past couple of days about the Democratic House members fleeing the state. Mm-hmm. And I actually champion and celebrate them for standing up and doing something different and saying that we're willing to risk arrest to stop the tyrant from gaining more power. What are we as unionized members, professors and others willing to do to save any ounce of what we want in a democracy? We have to be willing to stand united together and say, no, we're not going to allow this to happen. And I do feel like that is emerging based on what's happening on the ground. So, yes, the political scene is looking shaky because the courts are letting him do what he wants to do. But the one thing that in history has never, ever lost has been the people uniting and protesting together. And I think that we're on the cusp of that very soon.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are really happy that you said something like that, because there's a lot of dismay in the country right now. Let's see what happens in the not too distant future here. Augusta Wood, PhD, assistant professor of the Labor Education Program, School of Labor and Employment Relations at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. You have a spot here on America's Workforce, my brother. I love talking to you. You bring a lot to the table, and that's what this show is all about. We want to take a deep dive into history and see what happened years ago and how that reflects on us today. And everything is connected. Everything is connected, and so many things have not changed in America, sadly.
Yes.
You take care, stay safe, and stay in touch. Okay, brother?
You do the same. Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Quick break. When we come back, we're going to check in with a vice president of the Park City Professional Ski Patrol Association, an organizing drive, and we may get some results this week. Back in a few minutes. You're listening to America's Workforce.